joining us today. We are doing a video here at Coastal Credit Union where we focus on banking better to live better. With me today is Warren Murray, our subject matter expert, who is our financial well-being manager. Warren, how are you today?
I am doing fantastic, Amy. How are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm very excited to talk more about building an emergency savings. So I bet we should just get into it.
Okay, sounds good.
Warren, why should I save for an emergency? Why would that be important?
Well, Amy, it's called life. There's this quote that says, life is what happens to us while we're making other plans. And unfortunately, no one ever plans for their air conditioning to go out in the middle of the summer or for their heating unit to go out when winter starts. But it's just one of life's necessary evils. It happens to all of us. So building an emergency fund is very, very important. So when those circumstances do happen.
They do. And for me, it always seems to hit in threes. So what would you count, Warren, as an emergency when we're looking at something to save for?
So to all of my coffee drinkers out there, I would say that getting your mocha latte from Starbucks or getting your mocha latte from Dunkin' Donuts does not count as an emergency. The emergencies that I'm talking to are the emergencies like you go out to your car and you have a flat tire, or you come home and you're like, wow, why is my house so hot when I have the air conditioning unit on? And you find out the air conditioning unit isn't working properly. Those are the things I would count as an emergency. And again, to my coffee drinkers, having to have your mocha latte first thing in the morning would not be included in that emergency.
I think that I know more than one person, myself included, who would argue with the coffee emergency for the sake of those around us. But I do think I understand what you're saying. You know, we're looking for those big ticket items, something that's going to wreck your day, cause a total disruption with a ripple effect more than the cost of a cup of coffee.
Exactly.
So that being said, how much should I have in my emergency savings for these events?
So Amy, that's a great question. Typically for an emergency, your average emergency costs about $400. But how much you should have, that really depends on your budget. Some people have access to put more funds in an emergency, while others may not have those same resources. But one of the things that we do, we try to make a plan. And one of the things that I emphasize, it doesn't matter how much you have in there, something is definitely better than not having anything at all.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying start with $400 and then evaluate once you get there whether or not you think you need more or less.
That is correct in terms of planning. And that's something that we really talk about when it's important to creating an emergency savings fund, is to have a plan in place.
Yeah, probably would depend a lot on like family size, what type of income and regularity and consistency in other areas to determine that. So it's going to be unique for everyone.
That's absolutely correct.
So Warren, when we talk about having an emergency savings, where do we put that savings? You know, are we throwing it under our mattress, putting it in our sock drawer?
Well, throwing it in the mattress, I would not recommend it, but that would be an option. Amy, there are so many different vehicles that you can use to put your emergency funds in. Some are better than others. Some people are like, well, I just want to put it in my checking account. And you could put your emergency funds in your checking account. The one thing I would say, or caveat to putting it in the checking account, one of the things that we strive to do in the financial well-being program is try to have people differentiate their funds in terms of why they have it. So you're doing your regular daily checking activities in your checking account. So if you wanted to put your emergency savings in there, it may be hard to decipher what is for my regular expenses and what I have saved for an emergency. So you can do it in your checking account, but I would not recommend putting it in your checking account.
So what kind of account, like a savings account? Would that be better?
Yes, I prefer the savings account route versus the certificate. And the reason being is with the savings account, you have access to those funds when the emergency does arise. A certificate, you're going to gain interest. But like I stated before, life happens to us. There's no rhyme or reason when it happens. And oftentimes, if you have your emergency funds placed in a certificate and you need to access those funds, unfortunately, to withdraw those funds from a certificate would include a fee or fees sometimes. So I probably wouldn't put it in a certificate. Some people are like, well, Warren, can I just get prepaid cards to put my emergency funds in, like use $50 or $100 in prepaid cards. And again, that's another avenue that you could use. It's not one that I could recommend because, again, with life, when you have prepaid cards, I had a situation one time where a person had $150 or $200 in prepaid cards, but they lost their prepaid card. So that wouldn't be something that when the emergency happens and you wouldn't have access to it. Not saying that that's common, but that's something that could possibly happen. So for me, typically when I'm advising our members, that's one of the things I focus on. Like, hey, if we could have it in a savings account, something that you can see, to actually see that it grow, but at the same time, when that emergency arises, that you could have access to it, is one of the things that I recommend.
Warren, can we back up for a minute? Can you talk a little bit more to me about certificates and how they're different from savings? Because you said with a certificate, there could be a fee.
Correct.
Why would there be a fee?
So your certificate, you actually earn a little bit more interest, which would be conducive to helping you save more money. But oftentimes with certificates, you have to have those funds for a certificate, a certain amount of time. So sometimes it's a 6-month certificate or a 12-month certificate. And so when that certificate, the 6 months is up, you can access those funds with no fees. But if your emergency happens 4 months into that 6-month certificate, unfortunately, if you need access to those funds to withdraw those funds from that certificate, you would incur a penalty. And the whole purpose of that emergency savings account is to be able to break that glass whenever you need it.
So those 4 options between the checking account, savings account, certificate, and prepaid card options, definitely sounds like the top pick is going to be the savings account.
I would say that would be my number one recommendation, but something that you mentioned earlier, Amy, like putting it under your bed, I would say as long as you're saving money for an emergency, any avenue you choose would be better than not having an avenue at all. But if I had to recommend one of those savings accounts, I would recommend the savings option.
Well explained. Thank you. It makes a lot more sense differentiating each of those. So let's talk about a few key points when it comes to emergency savings. You hear the phrase, every cent counts. Do you really buy into that concept that every little penny really makes a big deal?
Absolutely, Amy. So many people fail to get started because they're like, well, I don't have $500 or I don't have $1,000. And one of the things I always say that regardless if you're putting $5 every week into your emergency fund or $1,000 every week into your emergency fund, every little bit is better than absolutely nothing. So again, sometimes people fail to get started because they think they don't have the resources. And one of the things that we tried to say with every cent counts, regardless if you're putting a quarter in, if you put a quarter in after 2 weeks, you have 50 cents. Well, 50 cents is better than having nothing in there at all.
It is. I think you're right. It all builds up and eventually over time, you'll start seeing that. And I think for a lot of people, once you start small and you keep building as you go, that's always encouraging because it's still building no matter what you're doing, as long as you're continuing to put it in there.
Absolutely.
So in terms of saving, how do you recommend best going about that and making the plan to make that amount, each cent count and have it build up?
And that's a great question, Amy. In terms of making a plan, you have to strategize in terms of knowing what you have coming in and what you have allocated to go out. And so many people like, well, Warren, I don't know. I don't know where to get started. And that's one of the things that we try to do in the financial well-being program is to help people build a budget. So when you have a real life look in terms of your expenses and the income that you have coming in, it really helps when we're trying to devise that emergency savings fund in order to help you plan.
So the fact that I can't have a $400 emergency savings next week, I shouldn't really beat myself up on that. Sounds like you're going with our cute little turtle icon, slow and steady, which we heard about as kids. Slow and steady wins the race. We read that all the time.
And Amy, one of the things that really encourages me and motivates me to continue to help our members is that when they see that growth, when you have a person who's meeting with you for the first time, they're like, well, I can't save, or I've never been able to save. And you have them putting $2 a week or $5 a week or $25 a week. And they're able to look at their account a month in or 2 months in. And I'm like, look, you have $50 saved for your emergency fund, or look, you have $200 saved for your emergency fund. And the joy that I get when you see them smile or them to start to believe in themselves, like, hey, this is something that I can do. And that's the whole purpose of the financial well-being program, is to help our members bank better to live better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with that. And I think it makes a lot of sense the way you put it, even if it's just $12 this week, maybe it's $15 next week. And, those small increments, by the end, you come at the end of 2 months, that's a significant amount of savings when you were starting with $0.
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you for going over that, Warren. I think that we have some questions coming in. Let's look at some Q&A.
All right, let's see what kind of questions we got. All right.
Warren, do I need thousands of dollars in my emergency savings account?
Again, I touched on that previously. Absolutely not. Would it be nice? Yes, but most importantly, it's just to start somewhere, Amy. So regardless if you have $100 or $200 or $5,000 in an emergency savings account, as long as you have something that will help offset that emergency that happens to all of us at some point of our life, is better than absolutely having nothing in there.
I agree. And I think that, at least, the working average is $400. So start, with that maybe as a minimal goal, and then just build and evaluate from there as you go.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see if we have another question. All right. Where can I find the money to build my emergency savings? Someone who already has a really tight budget, they're already feeling like they're planning how to pay their bills. How do they find extra money to
That's a great question. It always reminds me of me being young and me asking my dad, like, Dad, do you have any extra money? And my dad was like, I have never seen extra money.
I still ask my dad.
Yeah, there is no such thing as extra money. But one of the things that I strive to in telling people in terms of where do you find the money, in terms of planning a budget. When we help you plan a budget and you actually see what you have coming in versus bills that you have going out, what we try to do is to determine how much access do you have to other funds, where it may be like, hey, Warren, I have all the money that I have coming in, I have going out. Then we may have to make some modifications to your budget. What is something that you're willing to forego, or something that you're willing to decrease to help you pay yourself first? Because that's our whole point of helping people building a budget, is to allow money for you to pay yourself first before you allocate the rest of your resources to your bills.
Yeah, and that can be really hard sometimes, because you really think you need that NFL package,
right?
But do you need it when the NFL season is over? Maybe you can cancel it and not watch sports that aren't as important to you, or find another way to watch them. Once, pay yourself first, enjoy what you enjoy, but then refocus on your priorities. And
Amy, one of the things that we mentioned when we were talking about does drinking coffee constitute as an emergency? One of the things I tell people when it comes to planning a budget is everything in moderation. So if you are a coffee drinker, by all means, you should have access to your coffee. But one of the things I would say is that if you run into a person who doesn't really have any additional resources to put in that emergency savings, one of the things that we would try to talk to them, like, hey, from a moderation standpoint, I know that you like drinking coffee 7 days a week, but do you think we could possibly go 1 day a week without drinking coffee? So let's say if your average coffee is $5 and you go without 1 day a week, you can actually have $20 a month that you put in your emergency savings that you may not have thought about. So again, everything in moderation. And we try to, when we're analyzing the person's budget, is to try to find a way that we can allocate some resources. Again, in some cases, it may be $5. In other people, when we look at their budget, they may be able to allocate $100, but it depends on the person's budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first part is being aware and understanding exactly where your money's going, so that you can even make those decisions. It's the start. All right, let's see. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Warren, is it okay to spend my emergency savings?
Amy, that's a great question. Typically, when I'm meeting with members, we have the 2 extremes. We have some members that when they first start with their emergency savings, they are so proud of themselves that they just have like a few dollars in emergency. Then you have the other extreme where they've already met their goal of the amount of money that they have in their emergency savings, and they don't want to use those funds because they're like, hey, well, but I don't want to use it. And one of the things I tell people that, again, an emergency savings account is for an emergency. So if your car breaks down or if your air conditioning unit goes out, that would be the time to tap into those funds. And it does not mean if you tap into those funds that you're not saving, but basically what you're doing is that, hey, I planned for this emergency and now I have a resource to tap into those funds to pay for that emergency. So absolutely, if an emergency were to come up in your life that you need those funds, then it would constitute you being able to tap into the funds. But I would then make sure that you are tapping into those funds for an emergency.
And I think that comes with building a savings. And, first you have your emergency savings, you meet that goal, and then what? Do you stop saving? No, you just get to change your goals a little bit. And then that way you have the means to refill your emergency savings. All right, guys, we have one last question. How much is too much to have in your emergency savings?
So, Amy, when we meet with our members, we actually customize the plan to each individual. So one individual for an emergency may be the $400, which is the national average of how much an emergency is, where you may have another person who constitutes an emergency as in having 3 months of mortgage payments or 6 months worth of mortgage payments that would be in their emergency funds. But one of the things I tell people when we customize that plan, once you meet that number, so let's say that arbitrary number is $5,000, you have $5,000 in that account. Once you get over that, we can always reassess the plan. But one of the things I would say is that, hey, if $5,000 is what you have for an emergency and we've met that goal, we can continue to pay yourself, but you can allocate those resources to other avenues, like increasing your 401k contribution or saving up for your vacation or whatever. So it doesn't mean that once you met your goal that you stop saving. We would just then reassess and help you reallocate those funds to something that would be more beneficial for you for long term.
Great answer, Warren. Can't agree with you more. Warren, that wraps up what we're doing today in terms of looking at emergency savings. Thank you so much for joining us. If you guys want to reach out to us, you can always call Coastal at 1-800-868-4262. You can also go online, look at a lot of different resources that we have at coastal24.com. Thank you again for joining our video. Here we are at Coastal, working to bank better to live better.